Welcome to the Families Embracing Diversity Conference. In this session, we are talking with Varya Sanina, who is originally from Russia, but she is currently living in China with her three multicultural, multilingual children. Hi, Varya. Thank you so much for being with us. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you for this opportunity and for the introduction. I'm really happy to be a part of this conference.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your experience, about yourself?
I have been an expat for 22 years now. I've lived in China for the past 22 years. And my husband is a third culture kid. So he was born in one place, grew up in another one, and speaks several languages. So our children are also kind of third, fourth, whatever you call it right now, culture children who have dual citizenship from two countries they never really lived in, visited one of them. So I'm an educator. I work at an international school here, and I work with families. Besides being a teacher, I work with families from born. So I'm a postpartum doula, and I'm also a childhood neuropsychologist, something that really interests me. And my research paper for my thesis was on how bilingual brain works in regard of neuropsychological connections. So it was quite interesting to do that research and learn as well.
Right. How do you juggle all of those things? That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, before I used to work a little bit more closely with families, with younger children. I've been an educator for 27 years, and my work schedule has always been flexible because I was pretty much self-employed. And it's just the past 1.5 years that I have joined a school for my children's education.
Okay,
And it's a whole different story.
That makes sense. So then were your children born in China, or did they move to China with you and your husband?
They were all born here in
Okay.
this city where I live in the south of China.
Gotcha. Okay. So what is that like for them? You mentioned they have citizenship in places they've never been. I'm assuming they sometimes go back to visit family. What's it like for them to adjust to different cultures that they are a part of but haven't lived in?
Well, I'm originally from Russia, and we have been to Russia a number of times, maybe not enough, because it's actually much easier to fly my mom out than take all of us back to Russia. But well, the last time we visited was a while ago. It was pre-COVID, so of course my kids were younger. Based on how my oldest was, and she was about 7 years old the last time we went, she adapted really fast. And it took us about 2 weeks before she just started speaking more fluently. And after 6 weeks, she was like, fish swimming in her own waters. Unfortunately, we've never been to Tanzania, where my husband is from, because by the time we got married and had kids, everyone moved out. So his parents moved out back to their own, well, his mom moved out back to her own original country, and his brothers and sister also got married or living somewhere else abroad. We hope to visit, and the children need to see where their dad grew up, and it's still their country. That would be really great. But perhaps COVID really delayed us with all the plans. But yeah, in my experience, for younger kids, it's easier to adjust. For older kids, probably would be a bit more complicated because they become more self-conscious when they build connections with peers. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And then they know my family, like we still do calls with my family. So at least they have like a connection back home. Like they know there's grandma and cousins they can see. So it would not be hard to go back whenever we go back.
You say older kids. What age do you think would be like, oh, this is the easiest age to move kids cross-culturally? This is when it starts to get hard.
I think up to preteen age, maybe 10, 11, that would be easier for kids. Even though I would say, like, based on my oldest one, she's just a ball of joy and she loves making friends at any age. But the other two are a little bit more self-conscious in that regard, especially the second one. I think for her, it would get harder from around, it got harder from around she was 6 years old. For my son now, when he's 8, it's a little more, it's starting to get complicated. But they are still interested in making friends, and they're growing really more or less outgoing. So I think I'd say on the average, from what I observed, seeing kids coming into the country from abroad, but 10, 11 years old, that's when they get a bit more self-conscious and they have stronger connections to their peers back home. So it's harder for them to kind of blend in.
Right.
So
That makes sense. So since you have such a wonderful professional background with so many different areas of expertise, what I'm going to pick your brain about brain development. What does living in a new context, culture, language, what does that do to our bodies and our brains? And how do we know if someone's reacting normally? How do we know if the reaction is maybe veering outside of normal and needs some extra support?
well, I feel support is always necessary. It doesn't matter what age you are. When the children are younger, their brain pathways ways they are built in a different, slightly in a different way. All the connections they make, um, a bit more naturally, I would say, because they do not ask too many questions. They do get their own frustrations when they do not understand the language, but they start understanding better because at a younger age, there's a lot more body language and tactile stimulation where the children touch things and question things. Once you become older, you start questioning the grammar structures. Why is this said this way and that way? So, but again, it's not impossible to learn a language at a certain age. However, in regard of multiculturalism and multicultural environment, multilingual environment per se, it's great for our brain at any age. Even if we do experience certain level of frustration sometimes from being exposed to new languages, but we adapt. Our brain adapts all our life. And I know that, like, I don't know if you remember, some time ago there were studies saying that your brain stops building neurological connections at a certain age, so you have to catch that window of opportunity to teach the language. But the newest studies suggest that that's not true. And especially when it comes to like those studies they've made on Alzheimer's patients, right, or who were bilingual or multilingual, and how their brain was utilized and worked. So it was very interesting to learn that throughout all our life, our brain continues building these connections. And the more languages we speak, the more parts of our brain is involved into it. And we actually have this reserve in our brain when we speak more languages that helps us with different processing disorders later in life, if we ever have them, or with some kind of traumatic experiences we might have. So on the physiological level, the coping mechanism improves. On emotional, it's a different thing, there's a bit different curve here, but physiologically, people who are multilingual, bilingual, they have shown much better results when they were recovering from certain traumatic experiences. So yeah, it's amazing for us, and I always encourage everyone, whatever age you are, learn the new language. It's great for you.
That's amazing. I remember in school, I think when I went to college, they were still teaching like there's a certain age and you have to take advantage of it. That's great to know that it can happen at any age. So then you mentioned emotionally, it's kind of a different trajectory. What kind of supports can we give kids who are moving abroad to help them gain confidence in their new environment?
Well, first of all, a lot of kids, I think, they're afraid to try, or some of them are afraid of failure. And here it is important that we build a trust and connection with them, where we tell them that that's okay, and that with the time you will learn. I always remind the children that, in a healthy body, there are no people who do not talk or do not walk, right? And there are no people who cannot communicate, even if there are people with some difficulties speaking or hearing, they still have ways of communicating. So the same with languages, we still can communicate and we can still learn, we can adapt. Just need to try and give it, a try. And then we also have to ask, what support do you want from me? How can I help you? And great way to support a child is to do things together. Because when you're moving abroad, even if you speak the language of that country and your child doesn't, you can still learn together, encourage each other. I think just being there for your child is important. They should feel that they can lean on you. They have this strong foundation, and that they're never shamed for not succeeding in something, especially in language learning. Let's face it, for some of us it's more difficult than for others. That's okay.
Right.
So moral support in the first place, and building strong connections with your child where the child trusts you and can lean on you. That's the most important. I guess it goes for everything, not just languages.
Right. That is very true. So it sounds almost like in our brain and in our bodies, this challenge is actually making us stronger. It's pushing us to do things that are hard and scary, but they're not optional. So we have to dive in. And then that makes us more resilient and makes our brains stronger than if we weren't to go through those experiences. Am I understanding that right?
So, well, our brain is very resilient anyway. But when we learn different languages, different parts of our brain function. So if you look at some of the MRIs that have been done of bilingual, multilingual brains, while they're in like some kind of imaging that was done to analyze how the brain development goes, they had some interesting data collected that there's certain parts of the brain that are responsible for memory. They're utilized differently, or there's different parts of the brain that are normally not utilized by monolingual people. They're utilized in multilingual people. So that said, that for example, if our body undergoes some kind of traumatic experience, especially our brain, and there's some kind of damage, like with dementia or Alzheimer's, and these are very known studies right now. Even though multilingual people do experience, they go through the same process as monolingual people, but because of this compensation that happens in the brain, the process is slower. So if you're meant to have, if you have like genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's, for example, you will still get it because we do not have cure at the moment. But it's a matter of time how fast you get it, how fast you will progress in this. So I would say that based on recent studies, it's been established so far that if there are other contributing factors, of course, but we're talking about in regard of speaking several languages, right? That multilingual brain kind of slows the process, kind of pushes it back, because it keeps compensating different parts of the brain that normally are not utilized, but utilized in multilingual people. They keep compensating, allowing this process to slow down, and maybe people start experiencing the symptoms, the onset of symptoms later than their brain would normally make them to experience that. It's very interesting, I remember like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was like a boom of this different research coming up on that. And it was quite fascinating to know that our body is so capable.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Now that they're able to do brain imaging, there's so much new information. It is fascinating.
Fascinating.
So let's say there's a family listening to this who's thinking, I would really love to move abroad with my kids, but I'm hesitant because of XYZ. What would you say are your top 3 tips for parents who are thinking about moving abroad with their kids?
Well, first of all, do your research. Do it well. And we're very lucky in our age time that there's so much information available. And I'm not talking about the information of just random people giving random reviews. I'm talking about articles like quite, I would say, mm, well written, right, by experts, or even like analyzed by experts about the true situation, what's happening in the country, education system, accessibility of various products. So do your research first. And if you're moving with kids, do your research on education options. Because sometimes with China, for example, I know a lot of expats are moving here, not on full expat contracts where they can pay for international education. And if your kids are very young, it's easy to put them in kindergarten, and it actually makes sense where they will learn, in a natural environment. But if you have children of school age, I would say like older kids, right?
Right.
6, 7, 8, who do not speak that language, they would need additional resources. So what are your other options in case if you are not able to put them in education for the time being? Are you able to homeschool them?
Yeah.
Right. So what things are you prepared to do about their education? What are your options? And third, reach out to communities. That's the important thing.
Right.
So there's so many communities around the world already. We have so many wonderful groups that are being just on Facebook. There are local expat groups just in our town. We have about 10 of them, even though we
Wow.
don't have that many expats. There are also in every city where you would go pretty much with their expats, there would be an online group in social network there. So research and reach out to people to get those stories.
Right.
What was your experience if you were here with the kids? How did you feel? Where can I buy things, and do I need to bring anything with me? Things like that. So
Right.
like do your research, and it will help to plan ahead and measure, like, for example, if you're getting a certain salary offer, it seems like more than what you're getting right now, but in that particular country, what are the prices like? Is your
Right.
package is apartment included in your package? Bills, what kind of groceries, what kind of taxes, compensations, and everything. So like do your research really well, then you will be able to make a better decision. Maybe it's better for you to just stay back, because
Yeah.
after considering all of that, you feel so stressed and you're like, no, I don't want to do this. But there are also people who actually accepting jobs because they do want their children to go abroad and live and experience life. So in that case, just go ahead with it. Go
Just
with
do
your
it.
gut feeling. No, I mean, if your goal is to expose your kids to the world, there's some traveling families who like to travel every few years somewhere. They maybe work somewhere, save up, and then they travel. Go with your gut. I mean, there's still so much information available that you can get online and get all the support you can, and it will be fine.
So you kind of have to know your main goal. Is your goal
Yeah, what your goal is.
financial, or
Yeah,
is your goal experiences?
right.
That makes sense. So do your research, spend time with your kids, have experiences together. Is there anything
Yeah,
else parents
yeah.
should know?
Yeah, well, there is definitely, even when I moved to China 20 years ago, and now, despite the fact that a lot more is accessible right now, I feel that when you move to a new country, you always have this culture shock. No matter how well you've organized for it, no matter how well you've prepared, and you even visited the country initially just to see around, you will have the culture shock.
Yeah.
And you will definitely, sorry, so you can cut this out.
That's fine.
Okay. So you will definitely have a culture shock. And it's a normal thing that happens to people, because when one thing is to visit a place, another one is to live in it. You have to just accept that it's a part of it.
Right.
And trying to get to know the culture is important. Trying to learn about people, not just staying among expats. Get your really good support from expat community, but also make friends with the locals.
Mhm.
because they will show you the ways of how life is. They'll teach you some customs, and it will be easier to navigate through this complexities, through some kind of traditional things. Even though we would think, oh, we all live in Europe, for example. I mean, we're all the same. No, it's not, because you in one country, one gesture means one thing, and another it's another, right? So
Right.
the same. So you make friends with locals, if possible, neighbors, like the people around you, and you'll find it more comfortable
Mhm.
spending time with some local community and with the expat community. Like, find this balance that you can. This way, you will get the best experience and the best support.
Is culture shock something that um you have for a while and then it goes away, or is it something that you're constantly experiencing, like finding new things that you have to reconcile with and figure out?
I think it depends on personality.
Makes
I
sense.
think even in our own countries, we can always find something to complain about
Yeah, that's
and
true.
vent about. I could go with a cliche and say count your blessings, but that would be so highly unfair to tell people, because we do not know sometimes what to expect
Right,
100%. No matter how
right,
we prepare, then we just meet with a situation that we cannot accept it.
right.
So generally, culture shock is a short period of time where you navigate through complexities of a new place, and then once you understand better what's happening, you adjust your life and you get over it, and you start enjoying actually your life.
Right.
There are a few people I know who barely had any culture shock. They're just so
Mm.
accepting. They're like, that's fine. You know what? We can do it. We can just, go with it. But not everyone is like that. So
Okay.
my culture shock was quite long. It was more than a year long. But
Okay.
that's because in that 1 year, I moved to 3 different provinces and 3 different cities.
Oh,
And
wow.
every time I had to relearn, because the dialect was different, the food was different, the climate was different, and even people's behaviors. 20 years ago, people were still a bit more traditional in some ways, were different. So for me, it was a little tough.
Hmm.
But once I was over that culture shock, and that happened around the time I had to go back home, and I thought, I'm not coming back. When I came home, I felt like I missed the country so much.
Yeah.
I really wanted to go back. So that's where it comes, keeping your connections back home strong too,
Hmm.
because when you go into a new place, do not like ignore people and cut them off. Keep very strong connections with them, because you never know. You
That's
would
true.
have to go back, right? Or not. Or you will go back and you will want to say, I want to go back to that country, or I want
Right.
to transfer to another country. So always have a kind of emotional base for yourself. It could be your own family. Some people do very well with the fact that my whole family is moving, and that's my emotional and physical support, and I don't need anybody else. But for some people, the village is important. So they want not just their immediate family, they want their grandparents and aunts and uncles be in touch with them constantly, so that they have this, you know, support in the distance. Constantly somebody thinking about them. I don't know, some people believe in praying, so they're praying for them, wishing them well. So keep your connections and make friends with the local people, support from expat community, and of course, try to adjust to the new situation, try to approach it with an open mind, and then the culture shock would be much easier in this regard.
That makes a lot of sense. And that is a good point that everyone says parenting or life takes a village, but not everyone's village is the same size. That's
Right.
that's a very
That's
good
right.
point.
That's right.
So, where can people find out more about you, about your work, learn more about of all of your expertise?
Well, I blog on a website called creativeworldofvaria.com. And I haven't posted a lot for a while, but I do post sometimes on Instagram. Um, I do have a second Instagram account that is only in Russian, and it's mostly about, like, babies and births and breastfeeding and stuff. But I do post from time to time on my Instagram that is associated with my blog. And I'm also part of the Multicultural Kid Blogs community. So you can find some of my articles on their website. Yeah.
Okay. And
You
all
can
of
always
those,
reach out to me personally. I'm happy
perfect.
to share.
And all of those links will be underneath the description of this. And Multicultural Kid Blogs is the reason that this whole conference exists, because thanks to Leanna and Francis, all of the speaker recommendations were the people that ended up presenting. So that is a great resource as well. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of this information with us. And I will make sure that all of those links are easily accessible so that people can find you and connect with you.
Thank you.